Breaking Bad, one of the most iconic TV shows of all times, opens with Walter White in a trailer with dead bodies. Then he makes this video for his wife confessing all his wrongdoings. There's a siren approaching. He's sure he's going to get arrested. Then we cut to 2 weeks earlier, where we see Walter's very boring, mundane life as a chemistry teacher with a job at a car wash with petty family drama. And we're left wondering, how did this guy have 4 dead bodies in his trailer 2 weeks later? So, Breaking Bad opens in a flash forward, right? What that means is that it opens with a little snippet from the future of that story. So, for a quick refresh here, the story is the events in order, right? And plot is how we depict those events. So, that might be shown out of order. I have a video about that here on the channel. I'm linking it here in the comments. It's the difference between story and plot, and it might help you decide when to use flashbacks and flash forwards. And that's what I want to talk about today. What are flashbacks? What are the different kinds of flashbacks? What are flash forwards? When and why to use them? And all that stuff. So join me. Flashbacks are events from before the present moment in your plot. They are events from the past. Flashback. And there are different kinds of flashbacks. The first thing you need to know is that in order for a flashback to be satisfying and to kind of like justify your flashback in your movie, you really have to create interest. You have to create interest by creating either a mystery or a gap in your story that we're dying to know what happened in the past. Okay, so that's really when we're starting to talk about flashback. The first thing you need to ask yourself is, why this flashback? Why am I deciding to go back into the past to show an event out of order? There are 2 reasons for you to use a flashback. One is to reveal character. We see a lot of that. There was even a joke about how all musician biopics would have a flashback to when they were children and then like a sibling dies, right? So a lot of times flashbacks reveal character. Another kind of flashback is flashbacks that reveal plot. As I talk about flashbacks more and more today in this lesson, this difference and how each one is kind of approached will become more clear, hopefully. Okay. So just to exemplify even further, a character flashback is something like Clarice's flashbacks in Silence of the Lambs. We get cuts to her past as a child, dealing with her father's death. That's revealing character. That's revealing Clarice's past and her character. Sometimes you have flashbacks that reveal plot, like in, for example, the brilliant British show Broadchurch. Broadchurch is a mystery show. A child shows up dead. And the only moment in the story that we don't really see is the events that led to this kid's death, right? So one of the last scenes of the season, of season 1 of Broadchurch, is a flashback that reveals what exactly happened that day. So it's a plot flashback. Hopefully that makes the difference between the two a little bit more clear. Flashbacks should be always dramatized like a proper scene. There should be conflict. There should be context. There should be texture. There should be character with goals. You can't treat a flashback like a less important scene. They're as important as any other scene. So write it as you would write a normal scene, with conflict, with goals, with characters. All of that stuff that we've also covered in another class here about scenes, which I'll also link here in the description of the channel. Flashbacks should be dramatized like proper scenes. So that means you can't just write something silly just because it's in the past. You have to pay attention to how you're going to write those flashbacks. They should be treated as any other scene. They should have conflict, context, texture, character with goals, obstacles. All of these things that you would normally include in a scene should be in your flashback. If you're unsure of what I'm talking about, go check out the class I have here on scenes on this channel, which I'll also link here in the description below. There are 2 major types of flashback. One is an internal flashback, and the other is an external flashback. What do I mean by that? An internal flashback is a flashback that is still within the confines of the story that you're telling. So in the example of Broadchurch that I gave, the flashback is part of the story. Okay? It's part of the story of this child that's gone missing and showed up dead, and they're trying to figure out who did it. So it's internal to the story. Remember, story and plot, the difference. There's a video about this here on the channel. If you're unsure, maybe pause here and watch it. It's not very long, and it will maybe give you a little bit more context about the difference of these things. An external flashback is a flashback that cuts to way before, or at least before, the events of this particular story happened. So in the example that I gave of Silence of the Lambs, Clarice's story that we're watching in Silence of the Lambs is a story of an FBI cadet trying to catch a killer, Buffalo Bill. I don't know why I'm giving examples of killers, but anyway, it's the vibe today. Clarice is trying to find out who who the killer is and how to catch him. That's the story of that movie. That's the plot of that movie. So when we cut to flashbacks of her childhood, they are way before the events of this story. So that's an external flashback. So when you're thinking about flashbacks, it's a good idea to start. Is this part of my story? Am I revealing maybe part of the story, or am I revealing something from way back when in the past? As a general rule, and of course there will always be exceptions, an internal flashback tends to reveal a little bit more plot, and an external flashback tends to reveal a little bit more of character. But again, I'm sure you're going to think of examples. If you think of examples, feel free to comment below. We could do a whole video about that as well. Very important about flashbacks is to create the curiosity and the necessity for us to watch that flashback. And that can be done in two different ways. In one of the most iconic films of all times, Casablanca, we meet Rick and we see him at his cafe, and then he bumps into the lady. Now, I'm obviously going to forget her name. In Casablanca, one of the most iconic films of all times, they spent a long time in a flashback. And why does that flashback matter? It matters because through the first act, it creates interest. We meet Humphrey Bogart's character, right, Rick, in his cafe, and then there's the one song that the player can't sing. And that's the song that Ingrid Bergman's character is asking Sam, the piano player, to play. And when the two of them see each other, it's so clear that they have history, they have a past, they've known each other, and that's all in the subtext, in the acting. As these scenes unfold, you become more and more curious as to what the history is. So then the film very smartly cuts to their whole story as lovers in Paris and the raid and all that, right? So it creates interest. Really put thought into your flashbacks. Why are you doing them? How are you creating curiosity for your audience? Remember, audiences today are savvy, they're well trained in film watching, and they're jaded, right? They've watched a million movies before. So really be smart about it, really be thoughtful about it. So that's the idea of a flashback. It reveals plot, it reveals character, it might reveal both. It could be part of your story. Your story might be told a little bit out of order, right? You might plot it out of order. So then it's internal to your story. Or it might be something from way back when, from years before the story of your actual that you're telling started, and it's there to illustrate something that you feel is important for your audience to know. There is a third kind of flashback that it was more common back in the day in older films. It is a little more common, but you still see it happen sometimes, which is the illustrative flashback. It's the show don't tell flashback. A very straightforward example is if a character is getting interrogated by the police and the policeman asks him, "Where were you on the night of April 5th?" And then instead of us just hearing a monologue where our character just talks about what happens, we actually cut to the dramatized scene of those events. The movie Watchmen does that. There's an interrogation scene. It's here on YouTube. I'll also link it below, where it's exactly that structure. A character is being interrogated by an officer, and instead of us just having the camera on the actor telling us what happened, we actually see those events dramatized as a proper scene. Those are illustrative flashbacks. So now on to flash forwards. Flash forwards, as the name indicates, and that I'm sure you already know, are events from the future of the present moment in the story. And we've seen that happen more and more. I just gave the example of Breaking Bad. It opens in a scene and then it cuts back and then it kind of tells the story from there. There are a little bit of different reasons to use flash forwards versus flashbacks. Flashbacks, as we said, right? Character, plot. Flash forwards, they tend to serve a little bit of a different purpose. They usually kind of create this curiosity. It's like a promise of things to come, especially when movies or TV shows start a little bit on the slower side. You kind of promise the audience, look, hang here, hang with me. Something really exciting is about to happen, right? It is also used to mitigate shock. I'll give you an example. Movies that have very, very shocking endings, sometimes will open with that ending just so the audience, it kind of primes the audience for what is about to happen. An example that immediately comes to mind in Pan's Labyrinth, it opens with the horrendous fate of our protagonist. We almost don't register it, right? Because things that happen in the beginning, you're still kind of scanning the story and the world of the story. So it doesn't register as much. But if you watch Pan's Labyrinth, it opens with the ending and then it cuts back until, right, we catch up with the ending that is really shocking and upsetting. So the filmmaker, Guillermo del Toro, which I one day will learn how to say his name fast when I'm talking about his classes, right? It opens, so it kind of mitigates our shock by telling us, look, something really bad's going to happen to our character, but you're prepared now, so come with me. Another short film that does that, another film that does that, who happens to be a short film that I'm pretty sure is available online. If it is, I will link it here in the comments, is Rose McGowan Dawn. It's a short film. It's a really, really well done short film that opens with the ending because it's a shocking ending and it's an upsetting ending, but it opens with that ending. So it's priming the audience for the shock that is to come. So those are kind of two big ways to use flash forwards. A promise of exciting things in the future, like for example, in Fight Club, right? In Fight Club, it opens with buildings, a gun in his head. He has a gun in his mouth, right? And then it cuts to him just not sleeping and working an office job and going to meetings. But in our heads, we're like, oh my gosh, I want to get to that point in the movie where there's a gun in his mouth and all these buildings are about to blow up, right? Or Breaking Bad. Like it opens with that shocking moment of all those dead bodies in the van, in the trailer, and then it cuts to his mundane life 2 weeks earlier, and you're like, okay, I really, really want to know what happened in these 2 weeks. So that Walter White all of a sudden is this guy with bodies in his trailer. Or mitigate shock, right? Like as we mentioned with Pan's Labyrinth or the movie Dawn. If you can think of other examples, please link it here in the comments. There are, as with flashbacks, a few different kinds of flash forward. The first kind of flash forward is the bookend flash forward, which is what I've mentioned before, which is the ending of the film or your story showed in the beginning. It's a bookend. The end of the story, you show it in the beginning, and then eventually we catch up to that ending. Like in Fight Club, we see the last few scenes of Fight Club right up in the beginning. Okay, so that's a bookend flashback, and it could be done for different reasons, right? It could be done for surprise and shock and interest, create interest, curiosity. Just with flashbacks, there are different kinds of flash forwards. The first one is the bookend flash forward. Okay, that is the flash forward that shows the end of the movie, the end of your story right up in the beginning. So it's the example I gave of Fight Club or Pan's Labyrinth. We're watching the events of the end of the movie right in the beginning of the movie. Okay, and then eventually we're going to watch that ending again. Another very, very common kind of flash forward is the preview flash forward. And what that is, it's kind of the same idea, but instead of an event from the end of the movie, it's an event from earlier in the movie, from the middle, or maybe even the end of your second act. A movie that does that really well is Goodfellas. I know we all, at least me, when I think of Goodfellas, I always think of his narration. Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be a gangster. But actually, there is a scene before that, which is a flash forward. It's a very important moment for that character's life, for Ray Liotta's character's life, with the body in the trunk and all that stuff. Another movie that uses flash forward in a very interesting structural way is the amazing movie Michael Clayton. Michael Clayton is a movie in which George Clooney plays kind of a fixer. And the whole first act of that movie is actually a flash forward to when someone tries to kill Michael Clayton. And then it cuts back to, I think, 4 days earlier, where we're now so curious who's trying to kill this guy and why, right? And then it kind of tells the whole story back up to that point. So that's what a preview flash forward is. There is a kind of other form of storytelling that kind of morphs all of these together. Okay. And I'm going to call that the double narrative flashback or the double narrative flash forward. So technically, it's not really flashbacks and flash forwards, but for our concept right now, it is. What that means is that you might be telling a story in which there are two parallel narratives happening at the same time, and you cut from one to the other, one to the other. A very classic example of this is Slumdog Millionaire. Slumdog Millionaire, we open with this kid on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and we keep getting cuts to his past. Not only that, we get cuts to his past that are informing the audience why he knows the answers to those questions. So it still is a flashback, I guess, because you're opening in the present moment of the film, whereas this kid is on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And then you keep cutting to the past moments where we learn more about his life and all the events that led up to him being in a game. So it is technically a flashback and then a flash forward, but what really is happening is two separate timelines, and you're intercutting between the two of them. Okay, what about Memento? I always get this question, but what about the movie Memento? Memento, what it is, I mean, I guess you can consider it a flash forward, but it is just what it is a movie told out of order. Not even out of order, it's told backwards, right? It starts with the end and then it jumps a little bit backwards and then it reaches that last point we watch and then a little bit more backwards. So it's just an alternative structure there, which we will talk about as this channel progresses. We'll have whole classes on alternative structures. But one of those alternative structures is the parallel narrative, the kind of two different narratives, and they go back and forth. Creatively, it might not be a bad idea to plot each one individually and then link them together. So you know that you have two complete narratives with beginning, middle, and end, and dramatic arc, and all those things we need in a good story, but two of them, right? So more of a challenge for you. I hope that was helpful. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe to the channel. There's more stuff for you. There will always be more stuff. And comments if you have any questions, any suggestions for the channel. And thank you so much for watching.